I'm Rod Suskin, and I'm an astrologer. I've been studying astrology all my life, since really I was a child, and practicing it as a professional for over 30 years. Ancient people didn't believe that the planets influenced us. They didn't know that the planets were big blobs of rock. What the original idea of astrology was about is an effort to understand human consciousness, human experience, and the human condition. And where that effort arose from originally was the ancient Babylonians, who realized that if you can predict in general how things are going to be, well, for them it means you can beat your enemy and get their land, because the Babylonian Empire was interested in expansion. So what they learned to do was observe different signs in the sky, from the weather to the movements of birds and other creatures and so on, and they tried to understand what we would understand to be natural cycles of things and how they related to change. They must have also noticed things that they didn't really understand as natural cycle. So they were learning to synchronize in the same way that we synchronize the hands of a clock with what happens. I can look at the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 1 and the sun is shining, and I'll say, you're going to be hungry. The clock hasn't influenced you to be hungry, and I'm not a psychic. I simply understand human cycles. We get hungry around the middle of the day. We also have the experience that human behavior repeats itself from person to person. When you go to a psychologist or some other human behavior specialist, a lot of the way that they understand what's happening to you and what's likely to result is by looking at other people who've had the same experience. If another person has a bad childhood, they can make a prediction about your adulthood, because human beings are similar to each other, pretty much the same as each other in those bigger patterns. And so astrology was the same. It was able to use this general principle of human behavior and start applying it individually. Eventually, the Greeks got involved. Our friend Plato, perhaps the most famous of the philosophical Greeks, and they weren't fond of the Babylonians, so they're always looking for ways to criticize them. So one of the things that Plato said in the 5th century BC is he said, those Babylonians, they're just looking at signs. They're superstitious people. If there is anything real to what they're doing, it must be a mathematical system. Plato had the insight that this could be described mathematically, that if there are repetitive cycles, there's maths behind it. So Plato, although he didn't actually develop or practice astrology himself, he lays down some of the ideas that then the Greeks would develop to make astrology more mathematical. That means it becomes measurable and, in the end, predictable. Now think about that for a second. Where else do we know how we use mathematical formulae that predict human behavior pretty accurately? Well, we live in that world more than ever. It's algorithms of human behavior. They are so powerful that people think that their phones are listening to them. Whether their phones are listening to them or not is not my point here. The point is really that a lot of what looks like your phone listening to you is just an excellent prediction of your behavior based on all your previous behavior. That's called an algorithm. It's a series of formulae that produce a result, in this case related to human behavior. And we all know how powerful that is. Well, it's a little bit like astrology is an early version of algorithms. The 12 signs of the zodiac are a little bit like 12 seasons. Not really. They're not really related to the seasons of the earth, but they're pretty similar. It's a way of saying people or things born at this time of the year behave in a certain way. You can do that with plants. You can do that with some animals. Turns out you can do it with humans as well. So astrology is not so mysterious and occult and magical and mystical as it first looks. It is an early science that has continued to be developed, that is complex and contradictory and not always right, but like all the human ones and the complex algorithms of human species, it's right most of the time.